Do we have endless wars? Well, we have the Afghan war now. It's entering its 10th year, all right? We have the Korean War that has never been settled. The shooting stopped in 1953, and we still have 30,000 troops in South Korea. So why do we have endless wars? We've been in Iraq for, what, 8 years. We have endless wars because we have violated our own Constitution. The Constitution of the United States said only Congress can declare war. And we have not declared war since the World War II. After Pearl Harbor, December 7th of 1941, the United States Congress declared war on Japan. The next day, Germany and Italy declared war on the United States because they had a pact with Japan. Right? And the pact with Japan was, you get into war, we're with you. All right? So now here we were, instantly at war in 2 continents. A war in Asia against Japan, a war in Europe against Germany and Italy. Right? And those wars were ended in less than 4 years. The declaration of war gave a goal, and it was to win. All right? So then we got involved in the United Nations, and the United Nations now dictates our foreign policy. We went to war in Korea in 1950. And President Truman was asked, where are you getting authority to do this? And he said, it's not a war, it's a police action. Oh, tell that to the men who lost their lives. Tell that to the families who lost their loved ones, right? Police action, my foot. It was a war. Right? The war could have been won, but the war was dictated by the United Nations. And General MacArthur, who had actually won the war, was forced to retreat and forced to back down. And we still have 30,000 troops in Korea. Is our foreign policy wrong? I call it our foreign policy. Right? It's foreign to everything America was all about. So what are some of the other wars we've had? How about Vietnam? Well, the Vietnam War, we went under a United Nations requirement. It was under SEATO, Southeast Asia Treaty Organization, a subsidiary of the United Nations. You read the charter. Articles 52, 3, and 4 talk about regional arrangements that you can set up, and SEATO was one of them, and that's how we fought the war in Vietnam. And the war in Vietnam, we lost. No declaration of war by Congress. We lost. We went into Desert Storm in Iraq under a United Nations resolution. We went into Iraq again the second time under United Nations resolution. We're in Afghanistan today under NATO, another subsidiary of the United Nations, and the leader of the operation over there is a Belgian, not an American. Right? So why do we have endless wars? I've just explained to you. What's the answer to it? Get out of the United Nations and never go to war except with a declaration of Congress. By Congress to go to war. And we're getting ready to go to war against Saddam Hussein we actually did so in 2003. And the House International Relations Committee met 6 months earlier. It was in October of 2002. It used to be called Foreign Affairs Committee. Now it's International Relations. And a congressman from Texas stood up and he said, Mr. Chairman, I have a motion. It was Ron Paul of Texas. He said, my motion is that we declare war on Iraq, and I intend to vote against my own motion because I don't think we should go to war against Iraq, but we should not ignore the Constitution that says no war unless there's a declaration of war. The chairman of the committee, Congressman Henry Hyde of Illinois, who's now deceased, who's supposedly a great conservative, right? He said, Ron, we don't bother with that anymore. It's an anachronism. And they didn't bother with it. And the International Relations Committee voted 45-0 against Ron Paul's notion and gave the president the authority to wage the war whenever he felt he wanted to do so without a declaration of war. That was 2003, and it's still on, and here we are at the end of 2010. We actually went into Afghanistan before that. We went into Afghanistan, and the purpose was to get Saddam Hussein. And then the purpose was to stop the opium production. And then the purpose was to build enclaves here. And then the purpose is to fight the Taliban. And then what's the next purpose, right? How about winning, right? You're not going to win if you don't declare war. You're not going to win if you allow the United Nations behind the scenes. It's very, very clandestine, behind the scenes to dictate what you do, right? I was in the military. I didn't know this when I was in the military back in the late 1950s. If I had, I might have just taken my little lieutenant bars off and given them back to the Marine Corps. But I didn't know it. And the men who are over there fighting today, they don't know it either. But they're not being protected. People say you should support the troops. I say, what better way to support the troops than to bring them home? Right? Right? How about putting a few of them on the border between our country and Mexico to stop the flood of drugs and the flood of illegal immigrants coming in here, right? So is our foreign policy all upside down? Yes. What should the foreign policy of the United States be? George Washington said, commerce with all, entangling alliances with none. I'm for that. Let's have free commerce with all and friendliness with all, but no entangling alliances, and certainly not in a world government to be, which is the United Nations. Enough.
Well, what is it that inhibits our government from declaring war? What's their advantage?
It's an anachronism. The United Nations doesn't allow it. That's the reason. It's contrary to the pledge that we did when we joined the UN. I mentioned that one little sentence in the charter. All members of the United Nations agree to accept and carry out the decisions of the Security Council. That trumps the Constitution right there.